That's probably my biggest regret as far as Trek Profiles goes. Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 100, recorded February 2025. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where on most episodes we talk with a Star Trek fan. We hear their fandom story and we try to figure out why Star Trek matters to us. But we have something different for you today for episode 100. For this special occasion, we are doing a little retrospective on the podcast. So if you're new to the show, this probably isn't the best one to start with. You can go back and pick any episode that has a person's name as the title, and that's probably a much better example of what Trek Profiles is. You're welcome to stay here, of course, but if you do, just know that this is different from what we normally have on the show. We do, of course, have to start with the poll results from episode 99's Kobayashi Maru Lightning Round with guest Brent Allen. Now, I really loved this one since the M5 and I decided to do a Lower Decks themed lightning round, but it turned out that Brent had not seen the final season yet, so he was blind going into it, which was actually kind of fun, so I really enjoyed that. From the episode Next New Generation, which of these choices is your favorite alternative Cerritos? Freedom class, Sovereign class, Oberth class, Miranda class. Brent picked the Oberth, but the online poll said Miranda was the best with a 37.5% plurality. Oberth and Sovereign each got 25, and Freedom got only 12.5%. Which is your favorite cetacean ops whale, Kimmeloo or Matt? Both my guest and the online poll people picked Kimmeloo. He won by 2/3 to 1/3. Poor Matt. Pick your least favorite Lower Decks episode from this list: A Mathematically Perfect Redemption, Room for Growth, Mugatu Gumato, or Tuvix. Brent Allen said Mugatu Tomato, but A Mathematically Perfect Redemption came in first online with 40%, and the remaining three all tied with 20% apiece. Choose a Mariner line: Move Jennifer, Hey Armis, Shut Up, Vulcan as a or The Third Chew. No surprises here. Brent and the poll takers agreed that the Vulcan line was the best. It dominated with a 55% majority. Jennifer and Armis tied at 18, and The Third Chew got only 9. The Third Chew. Best Lower Deck surprise guest: Sonia Gomez, Leia Brahms, T'Pol or Cito Jaxa. Now, my guest was on board for T'Pol, and it was no surprise that that was the pick on line 2 by 80%. Gomez and Cito tied for 10, and no one picked Leia Brahms. And that's it for the Kobayashi Maru. Let's get on with the show. As my longtime listeners will know, I began Trek Profiles in 2018. Work began in January, and I dropped episode 1 on March 10th. Now, that's the origin of the show, and I've talked about where the show came from several times already, so I won't recap it here, except to say that if anyone would have said to me that I'd end up doing podcasting for 7 years, I would not have believed it. Most podcasts never make it past 10 episodes, so I take the longevity as a compliment. One of the things I am rather proud of is how the show has been very consistent in format. I really haven't changed much as far as how each episode goes. Now, there have been a lot of behind-the-scenes changes as far as technology, how I edit it, how I actually create the show and all the stuff behind the scenes, but I have largely stuck to the template as I originally designed it, which I kind of like. Now, the way I see it, there are two things that are essential to whatever success this show has had. First is curating the guests. As we record this, I have over 30 requests to be on the show sitting in a folder. I could never get to them all, and given that I do only a monthly show, I had to be judicious in how I selected each guest. And whenever I received a guest pitch, and boy, I sure got a lot of them, I usually looked for a few things. One was I always wanted stories where Star Trek made something happen in the real world. Someone made an important life decision that was influenced by Star Trek. They wanted to talk about it. But something physical, some manifestation had to occur as a result of the Star Trek fandom. And I always felt like that's where the show really shined. So that's what I always looked for. The pitches I wasn't really interested in were the ones where it was like, I love Star Trek and just want to talk about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but there are a million podcasts out there that scratch the I love Star Trek and just want to talk about it itch. And I just felt like I didn't need to add to that. This show had a particular focus, and I wanted to be true to that, at least as much as I could. I also tried very hard to bring you guests that might be new to your ears. There are lots of folks out there who appear in a bunch of podcasts, me included, And it brought me a real joy, honestly, to introduce you to fans that, it's probably maybe the first time you were hearing that person, and they might have a special story to tell that you hadn't heard before. And that was something that I felt that this show could do and deliver upon. And I felt it was really important to try for that. Now, one thing that I did not plan on was doing this series that I did with entirely new Star Trek fans. I was on the Star Trek subreddit one day, and I saw this post that was something along the lines of, quote, "I always thought Star Trek was terrible, but I never watched it. Now I watched it. Now I'm 150 hours in and put the whole thing into my veins," close quote. It was something like that. So I sent that guy a message, and I ended up doing a whole series with brand new Star Trek fans who were not the people that had always been fans of the show. These were people who came to the show much later in life and were in large part disconnected or not connected in any way to the larger fandom. And those folks had a unique perspective. Things jumped out at them in the show that many of us longtime people never noticed. They had no knowledge of the fan tropes or the things we argue about or the history. And honestly, I found those to be some of the most refreshing and interesting and fun interviews I ever did on the show. So go through the back catalog and find those if you're interested. On the flip side, there are a very few episodes I recorded, but I chose not to release. Now, there are various reasons for this, and I talked about it a little bit on the show here and there, but as a result, I made some specific changes in how I do the prep for the show. First, I implemented a real name policy. No, wait, that's not right. That's kind of a lie. I implemented let's call it a non-anonymous policy. Nobody could come on the show under a blanket promise of anonymity. If you used another name, that was fine, but people had to know who you are. It was important that we all be able to follow up with people and engage in the conversation in all the social medias and outside the four walls, as it were, of the podcast. And I just felt that was really important. Second, and anyone who's been on my show over the past few years can tell you this, I always tell them before we start the recording or before we actually start the show that in my sole discretion, the episodes may never be released. And this was just to be extra explicit about that. And as we stand here today, I stand by the decision to keep those episodes buried. And as we record this, I have even deleted the source files of the recordings too. So no regrets. But speaking of regrets, I do have some in the guest department. Regrets, that is. There is a list of 5 people that I desperately wanted to get on the show. They had all the main criteria for being a fantastic guest on Trek Profiles. They had a wild or touching Star Trek story to tell. Something happened in the real world, but they just couldn't quite commit to being on the podcast. In some cases, they were too shy. In others, they didn't think their story was too compelling. But I got to say, I've been doing this a while, and I can confidently say those stories would have slayed, but the potential guests disagreed. I just couldn't close the deal. So my failure to bring you those, that's probably my biggest regret as far as Trek Profiles goes. I wish there was something I could have said or done or some different way I could have pitched the show to make that happen, but it just didn't work out. So I had said that there were 2 elements of the show. First was curating the guests. Second was conducting a hopefully interesting interview. It was a skill I had to learn as I went. I always felt like I had to do a bit of a balancing act since I was the host and I wanted to be welcoming and friendly, but I also wanted a feisty chat. So sometimes I would say things to guests just to give them something to react to. I always prepped guests that I might do this as a way to kick the conversation up, and it was never done with malice or anything like that. Otherwise, the show just becomes, I love this episode, and me saying, yeah, it's great, and then we move on. And I just wanted something more to emerge in the conversations here on Trek Profiles. Now, I leave it to you, my listeners, to determine how successful I was at this. One thing I did not expect from my guests is that these episodes became a little time capsule for their thoughts and opinions on Star Trek. Guests who had been on years ago, when revisiting episodes, had new and different takes on things. Sometimes they would tell me, oh my God, if I was to come back on, I would say something completely different about episode X, Y, or Z. Honestly, I gave a lot of thought about how I could use that content, but the logistics of all of that just seemed too daunting, too challenging, and I couldn't do anything with it. So what's next for Trek Profiles? Well, I'm putting the show on hiatus. As I record this, I'm not sure if I'm going to do more episodes or not. Perhaps someone else would like to do a show like this. They're more than welcome to it. They'd probably do a better job than me, that's for sure. But having said that, I am still around. I'm on the Star Trek cruise in 2024, and I've already booked for 2025. I'll be at Star Trek Las Vegas, the convention that's here in Las Vegas, and I'll still be on all the socials. And if you ever need a guest for your Star Trek podcast or whatever, hit me up. I'm not that hard to find. And that's going to do it for episode 100. I thank each and every one of you for being part of Trek Profiles. Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your friendly hails, your barrages of quantum torpedoes, or videos of yourself in a Starbase 80 cosplay to feedback at trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us, maybe using the show, or it may be sent directly to the Mirror Universe. This time, I leave you with a quote from Captain Spock, who said in the movie Wrath of Khan, "I have been, and always shall be, your friend." Thanks to all my listeners for subscribing and sharing the show. Thanks to all my guests who made the show possible. And may every one of you live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.